Who are they? I mean, I know there's a fair amount of variety, but basically, who are they?
There are a lot of children. There are a lot of families who are in the second generation or multi-generations of poverty, struggling to get out. But there are other folks who are suffering from mental illness, for example, or a substance abuse problem. A lot of families that are struggling are families where there's been abuse, domestic abuse, and to seek out assistance, usually the mother and her children would leave a situation that's abusive and end up in poverty. In this economy, there are folks who have lost their jobs and then have lost their homes because they're unable to continue with their house payments. Sometimes it's the result of an illness where somebody's lost their job, the medical bills mount, insurance, if they have it, doesn't cover all of it, and they end up living in these very tenuous situations. So it's a variety of types of people. And then there are folks who are working at minimum wage jobs, which will not get you out of poverty.
A lot of it is the children of single parents and mostly single mothers.
That is a lot. I don't have the statistics on that, John, but yes, that is the cause of a lot of poverty. And you look at the difficulty that single moms have with staying employed because of their children, particularly young children. Childcare costs are very high. There are transportation issues, housing costs. There's a lot that will conspire against that family doing well. If they've started off with a lower education level or have some situation which pushed them into being single moms.
Are a lot of these young women part of that? Are they often the children of poor mothers themselves?
Oftentimes there are, and if you think about it, you'll see a lot of teen moms.
Right.
I call them children having children,
Right.
Younger ones. They have a tough time finishing their education, getting a decent job. They're caring for their children. Child care expenses, early childhood expenses are very high. They might, if they get a job at all, it may not have health benefits. They sort of get tied to the benefits that are available through government. And it's tough to get out of that situation. And one of the things we've looked at when we've looked at poverty in Vermont is the so-called benefit cliffs issue, where you'll see, let's take your example of a single mom, a couple of kids, who gets a raise at work, works hard, is trying to do the right things,
Right.
gets the raise and finds that they've fallen off a benefit cliff. They've no longer eligible for as much child care support or housing assistance, or maybe they don't qualify for the Dr. Dinosaur program anymore. And it sort of pushes them right back to where they were before they got that raise.
So as you do better for yourself and you're getting on in the world, it actually can hurt you.
It actually does hurt you. There's a disincentive for a lot of these families to get ahead because we do have certain benefits that support those lower income families, but they lose the benefits faster than their wages increase. So I've interviewed young moms who say, geez, I did the right thing, I'm working hard, I got the extra workforce training, I got a $2 an hour raise, and I found that I lost more because I don't qualify, my child doesn't qualify for the Dr. Dinosaur program, or my child care subsidy got cut back so much, or my housing subsidy got cut back so much, that they're actually in worse shape than they were before they got that $2 an hour raise. It doesn't make any sense, but it tends to push people back and they feel like they never can get ahead. The system doesn't work for them.
To what extent do you think the problem of poverty in Vermont is just low wages, and to what extent is it that these people, for various reasons, didn't get the education and are not getting the education that they need to qualify for a better job?
Yeah. Well, it's a combination, John. If you are on minimum wage you haven't finished high school, let's say, you're going to have a hard time getting ahead. Part of it's just the nature of the economy. Back in the when I was growing up, back in the 50s and 60s, a high school education and a good solid work ethic was a ticket to the middle class. Right. You could get a good manufacturing job with great benefits, great retirement, you could buy a home, all that was going to be there. Well, the world is different now. Somebody even with a high school diploma isn't guaranteed that ticket to middle class life, even with all the same values, because the nature of this economy has changed. A lot of our manufacturing jobs in Vermont and across the country have gone overseas. If they were using less skilled labor, for example. It's cheaper to go overseas. So what we're seeing in Vermont is what we're seeing nationally. It's a changed economy. It's tougher to get ahead. We're seeing a real skewing of income levels in this country, and I think the middle class here and across the country is threatened.
Are you worried that people actually below the poverty line are going to be hurt by both the federal and the state budget cuts?
I'm very concerned about what's happening at the federal level. I mean, even as we're talking here today, we're getting more details about what the federal budget might look like, both for the remainder of this fiscal year, because they haven't passed budgets in Washington. They're working on these continuing resolutions, right, which means they haven't decided what the budget amount's going to be, but also for the next fiscal year, and the federal fiscal year starts October 1. We're hearing a lot of things that are very scary to me sitting in this office, in this job that I have. The LIHEAP program. I mean, the president, even before negotiations start with the Tea Party Republicans in Congress, has already given away a number of items, including the heating assistance program, to perhaps cut that, to perhaps cut the assistance that goes to our so-called CAP agencies, our community action programs that work with the poorest of the poor. Those things are very frightening to us because states have limited ability to make up for those programs. We really count on the federal government. The governor's budget, Governor Shumlin's budget, which I had helped put together for the Agency of Human Services, does protect the poorest of the poor. There are cuts which will affect some low-income Vermonters through some of the mental health services, disability services, some of the elderly services that we have. But we're trying to find ways to mitigate those. But the programs that are aimed at helping those folks who are struggling just for basic survival, the housing assistance, weatherization type programs, the food programs, we did not touch those. We wanted to keep those intact. So I feel very confident that we did not do anything in our budget that's going to hurt those lowest income Vermonters. Not that there's not pain in this budget, there clearly is.
Do you sometimes feel you got this rather prestigious and important job, and the first thing that happens in this prestigious and important job is you get a situation which offends your core constituency, and I suspect from what from hearing you campaign and in the Senate these last few years, a lot of your core beliefs. How are you dealing with this?
I'm getting asked that question a lot, John. The way I'm dealing with this is I'm doing the best I can with the value system that I have, that I share with Governor Shumlin, to deal with some very difficult times. Our economy is down. Vermonters are struggling. Even those who are working and still have their jobs, they're seeing their health care costs go up. They're seeing a lot of their expenses go up. They're seeing the property taxes go up. We're struggling to get through with this tough economy. At the same time, sort of the double whammy, we got hit with the loss of federal money. For 2 years, Vermont and all the other states received substantial amounts of money, so-called stimulus money from the federal government. That helped us get through these tough times. Well, I walked into this job and that money's disappearing at the end of this fiscal year on June 30th. So we're getting these pressures which are having a real impact on the budget. I knew that walking in. I didn't come in with my eyes closed. I came in with my eyes wide open when the governor offered me this job. We talked about how difficult this budget year was going to be. And I'm in this role where my job is to work with the governor, work with the resources that are available, and I feel very good about the way we put this budget together. Yes, there are some constituencies who are upset with this, and I understand that. If I was in the legislature, I might be fighting back, but I'm not in the legislature. I'm here to try to make this the budget that I have available to me, which is about $2 billion between state and federal dollars, to make it the best we can for Vermonters, and then to keep working to find ways to lessen the impacts on Vermonters. We came in, the new administration, the new governor, the commissioners who work in this agency with me, we had about a week to work on the budget before we had to wrap it up so the governor could present it to the legislature. Well, that didn't stop our budget work, and it didn't stop my efforts here. We're looking at ways to restructure a lot of the programs. We're looking at ways to make things here work more effectively on fewer dollars, things like information technology, for example. We're looking at our relationships with the nonprofit sector that provides about half of the services that this agency pays for. I am hopeful. I can't guarantee it to the folks who are concerned about the mental health cuts and the elderly cuts and the others. I can't guarantee that we're going to find ways to eliminate those impacts, but we're going to find ways to lessen those if we can. At the same time, the governor was very clear that he didn't want to hurt the poorest of the poor. He didn't want those folks to take the hits. So those basic programs, the Reach Up programs and the temporary assistance to needy families, we call it TANF, it's the welfare program, general assistance, those sorts of housing supports for emergency housing, emergency fuel. We didn't touch those programs. We said we need to keep these intact. We need to keep what we have of a safety net in Vermont intact. Now, these other issues are going to be difficult for the people involved. I'm doing my very best, and the governor's very supportive, that we're going to try to find ways to soften these impacts.
And finally, just going back to poverty itself for a minute, if you could do one thing to end or at least substantially reduce poverty in Vermont, what would it be? Is it primarily a matter of money, that these people need more money, or do they need better social services, better education, or of course is it both?
Yeah, I'm going to say two things. I know you want one, but I'm going to say I think there are two things that the work that I've done and others have done looking at poverty in Vermont would point to every single time. One, I talked about that so-called benefit cliff effect, so that if we could eliminate that, and we hope to get a grant to study that and to find ways to work with the federal government to change the regulations, so instead of dropping people off, they get a lower level of benefits, but they don't drop off entirely. So the point there is work is going to be a good pathway, probably the best pathway out of poverty. We don't want a system in place where people are discouraged from trying to get ahead and make more in wages. That disincentive is really hurting a lot of families. It keeps them in an endless cycle. We need to have the work incentive mean something. That's the first thing. The second thing is education. And I would start with the governor's proposal to make sure that we have universal pre-K available. A lot of children start off behind. When you grow up in a poor family, there are more health problems, there's lack of proper nutrition sometimes the child care and early education efforts aren't as strong as they should be. And those kids walk in the kindergarten door and teachers will say, this kid's got, the odds are stacked against that kid. This kid's going to have a harder time succeeding than his or her middle class peers. It's a generalization, but it's statistics bear it out. Children from low-income families have a harder time getting a good start in school, and they're more likely to drop out. They're more likely to have the various social problems that we've talked about in this interview. So let's help families help their children get off to a good start. You know, where the family doesn't need support and that they can raise their child and have that child at home, that's great, but not every child's going to grow up in that situation. Let's make sure we're helping those kids get off to a good start so they have an opportunity for education. Education and a good job are going to be the tickets out of poverty.